everybody. It's a pleasure to see you today. I could see from my photo there that I got a haircut recently and a shave. Today I'm going to talk to you about this changing landscape. I love the metaphor of landscapes that the conference is using. Here's a landscape I found of deception. So you see truth is up there, but there's all these different types of deception. We'll talk a little bit about those today, but I want to talk about the general communication landscape. It really does feel that since communication is at the core of the revolution that's taking place, that the landscape, in many ways, is shifting beneath our feet. With the change in adoption of mobile technology in particular, it feels like everything we know about communication is changing. What's next? What do we do now? How do we control our message or strategize? And I'm going to argue a little bit against that concern and worry by pointing out that we have very, very old psychological principles and old psychological dynamics that we can rely on as they collide with these new technology. I'm going to go over a couple of examples. I'm going to start with perhaps the most important principle in communication, which is trust. Some would argue that you cannot communicate without trust. There is no language use, for example, without a truth bias, that you believe the other person is being cooperative. So how does trust work when we now communicate at a distance, when we can use the phone to talk to anyone, anywhere, at any time? A lot of concern out there around trust decreasing. One of my colleagues calls it a deception epidemic, that technology is undermining the trust that we have in each other. People are lying more. There's lots of reasons why you'd expect people to lie more. You can't see the person when they're texting. There's no nonverbal cues, etc. There's decreasing trust in institutions. It goes on and on. I think, personally, I'm going to show you some research to back it up, that I think this is misguided. I think trust is alive and well. And I'm going to show you some studies that my research group does on deception and technology. And the first study I want to talk about is where we lie most. Do we lie most face-to-face, on the phone, or in email? We do a lot of diary studies, and they've been done in a number of different countries replicating this, and the answer actually is not the most in email, though most of the people in the room would feel like email is the place where lies take place the most. In fact, the phone is the liar's technology. Email is a lot lower. Now, really quickly, can anybody guess why email might be a bad place to lie? Right, very good. There's records. Any politician caught up in a scandal in the last 10 years knows this very, very well. In New York State, where I'm from, the number one piece of evidence in divorce cases starts with E. It's usually email or some other E evidence. So lying online in text like that is a very bad idea. You give the other person your record. Okay. What about on LinkedIn, places where we now present our resumes? We did a number of resume studies, and what we find is when we compare a paper traditional resume and how many lies are in it compared to how many lies are in a LinkedIn profile, the resume has more lies. Okay? The resume has more lies about job skills, responsibilities, etc. If you want to know what a person's real background is, LinkedIn's going to give you the better example. But most people thought traditional resumes would be the better place. Again, because of that record, and because LinkedIn is actually connecting you to your network, the people that know your background. Facebook profiles, oh, they're just egotistical, optimistic, selectively self-presented wonder gems, right? Can't trust anything you see on Facebook because everyone's just bragging. Actually, a study not by my group, but another group found that not to be the case. You can take people and actually get them to meet a person for about 5 minutes, or you can get them to look at their Facebook profile, exact same impressions of the person. You're just as accurate learning about a person from their Facebook profile as you are from a 5-minute conversation. Facebook profiles reveal who we are. How about online dating? I'm sure some of your friends have done online dating. I know none of you have. And some of your friends have probably had horrible experiences around meeting somebody that lied. And those stories are really great, but I don't think that they're the typical. What we did to find this out was we brought people into the lab that were online daters, and we actually measured them. We measured their height, got them on a scale, got their weight. We got their driver's license to get their age, income tax, all this.
You didn't measure too much.
Well, the women didn't like the scale and the weight, that is for sure, I must admit. But the men, which I'm showing you here, they didn't like the height so much. So here you can see it's small, but this is how tall they said they were. This is how tall they actually were. It doesn't really matter, but you can see the men sort of circulated over here, what came out was that men all lied about their height by a little bit less than an inch. We called it strong rounding up. So if you're 5'8" and 1/10, you're 5'9". In fact, it turns out most men's heels are about 9/10 of an inch. So maybe we're matching our lie. But the big important point is, look at these lies. They're not very big. They were about an inch. And most of the men lied by just a little bit. Most of the women lied about their weight and their body shape, but just by a little bit. And the reason is this: you need to lie enough to get to coffee, but not so much that you never get to bed, okay? That's the idea. So people lie strategically and frequently, but subtly. Okay. Now, these findings usually go against what people think to be true, that there's so much deception online. Well, why is there less deception in these online spaces? And again, I'm ignoring the scams from the Nigerian prince, right? That guy, he does not have money for you. These are the communications between people we really care about: our colleagues, our friends, our family, and ultimately going to be our consumers, our audience, our stakeholders. Well, I think there's a couple of reasons. Here's one from the deception literature. Most people find this interesting, so I'm going to share it with you. It's not my main point. But one thing is that we're really bad at detecting deception. Whether we're face-to-face like this or not, or online, 4 decades of psychological research says we're about at chance. 54% accuracy. If I were to show you something fake and something real, you'll perform a chance, and we're going to test you guys on that a little bit later. So it doesn't matter if you lie online versus face-to-face. People are going to be really bad at detecting it. The other thing is, this comes as a shock to many people, there is no single reliable cue for deception. Most people around the world in a big study found that most people think there's something special about the eyes. And that is just not the case. Sometimes people will look right at you. I did not have sex with that woman, Miss Lewinsky. And other times they're shifting, looking around. If anybody thinks that you look up and to the left when you lie, it's wrong. Lots of research shows there's no single cue. So if all those cues go away, because I'm in email or text messaging, it doesn't matter. And the last is that people lie for a reason. There's a very small percentage of the population that lie for fun. Okay, so psychopaths, for example, make up maybe 1%. So if there's 700 people here, there's 7 psychopaths, so be careful. You should be very careful. Most of us lie for a reason, and just because we go online, and just because there's no cues there to detect me, doesn't mean now all of a sudden I'm going to become a psychopathic liar. Okay? But I think there's actually something much deeper than just the deception research that applies to all of the psychological dynamics I'm going to list for you today. And that is that we've been speaking like this for at least 50,000 years. Most people, linguists, think maybe it's a little longer than that now, 450,000 years. Well, let's just say 50,000 years. How many humans have lived since then? About 100 billion. Okay, so there's been 100 billion people have lived before us. And for most of that time, every single word they said disappeared, because the first writing at all that we can find is about 5,000 years ago. So well over 80, 90 billion people, every word they ever said disappeared. Every word that they wanted to share with another person, they had to be in the same exact place. Okay? All those words disappear. There's no evidence at all. They had to be in the exact physical place. Writing comes along, that changes, but it's not until about 500 years ago that the printing press emerges. And during that time, between first writing and the printing press, only a tiny, tiny, tiny fraction of the population would know how to read or write. Maybe 0.001%. So even most of those people, everything disappeared and they had to be in the same place. In fact, literacy rates were below 50% until World War II. Okay? So most of the humans that have ever lived never wrote a word, never read a word, and they always had to be in the same room. Now, how many of you have written a message today? See a show of hands. So today, this room has written more than almost all of humanity. Eric Schmidt has told us that in their estimate, Google's estimate, every 2 days we produce the same amount of information that all of humanity produced up until 2003. So there's a shocking amount of communication information taking place now, and it's taking place after we've evolved to talk like this. We've evolved to talk face-to-face. And because of that, we have these very old psychological principles that are going to stay. And that's why deception works the way it does. And I'll show you a few other examples here so you don't think it's just deception. There's also impression formation, one of the core aspects of psychology. Anytime we meet somebody, we immediately try to determine their gender. We're going to immediately try to determine their age, and, no polite way to put this, whether we'd want to have sex with them or not. Now, this is very quick. It happens within 100 milliseconds or so. Here's my friend, Rob. He's having a conversation with somebody. You're meeting him for the first time in text. Your brain, because it doesn't have all that other information, is very good at filling it in. So right now, your brain is doing all this work, and it's trying to visualize what Rob is like. And that's very different than if you met him face-to-face. Here's actually what Rob looks like, an unflattering photo of him eating a sandwich. But it flushes out all of the ideas. We were interested in what his age was, his sex, whether we'd be attracted to him or not. All of this gets fleshed in. What happens is when we're in this space over here, where we don't have very much information about him, we fill it in. We actually idealize who that person is. Okay? And this is a first example of a principle called less is more. That when you present a little bit less about an entity, the person can come in and fills it out. I don't know if you ever had this experience of reading a book, and you learn a character, and then you go see the movie, and it's a disappointment. It's the same idea. Your imagination is more powerful than any real-world thing. All right, how about something like self-disclosure? All good communicators know, like a salesman, that if you disclose something to somebody, it creates a real need for that other person to reciprocate. So here's the classic idea. So I self-disclose something. I'm a hockey player from Canada. Now there's an imbalance once you've perceived that I've self-disclosed something, and you will feel a very strong need in a conversation to reciprocate some other information about yourself because of that imbalance. What happens online is that gets intensified. So you see that self-disclosure, you're like, wow, he's told me something really personal about himself, that he's a hockey player. Wow, that's intense. Okay, it doesn't sound that intense. I should have chosen a better example. But now you have to match that intensified perception. So now you tell me something more intense, like maybe something about your childhood. And now I see that and I'm like, wow, that's really amazing. I have to and you see this. And so this is why a lot of the comments in online spaces can become so intense, is this dynamic, intensified reciprocity. So in each case, deception, impression formation, disclosure, you can see old psychological principles adapting to this new world, but not in ways that we're like, wow, I had no idea how to predict that, but in very systematic sorts of ways. All right, so let me give you what I think are some important takeaways from my talk and the research that we've been doing. One is that less is more. As communicators, many of you know that a short thing is often going to be better than a much longer document. And that, I think, is really true, and our work really emphasizes that. It's better to have 1,000 tweets than one long article. Now, of course, more is also really good. So the 1,000 tweets, in some ways, is more. But they're very small, right? Each little thing is small, and many of them creates new information. So the point here is that having a lot of little comments can be as powerful, if not more powerful, than one big comment. Now, how do you go about getting less is more and more is more? And this is something that's really huge, and Patrick and Lars and I were talking about this earlier, which is people now, our stakeholders, our audience, our consumers, our constituents, they want to be part of the conversation now. They have the tools and they're allowed to. In fact, I think that the era of mass media, TV, newspapers, that was the anomaly. We're now returning to the way we essentially evolved, which was talking to each other and not having an elite few talk to all of us. So participatory communication is allowing your audience, your constituents, into the conversation. And it's a bit scary for communication practitioners, and we don't have as much control. So we have to think about ways to do that. And I think I can show you a couple of examples of how important this is. So there's just this explosion of user-generated content. People are writing reviews and comments about everything, millions of pieces a day, for free, for nothing, for their own purposes. And with that comes these concerns. Okay, well, I don't know if I can trust these things. There's all these headlines about fake reviews, for example. Well, let's go to an example of a fake review. Here, one of these reviews is real. We took it from TripAdvisor. And the other one we paid for, okay? We paid somebody on MTurk to write a fake review. So I'll let you guys read these for a second and see if you can detect which one is fake. All right, how many of you think, oh, need more time. Okay, sorry, there's some careful readers up front. You can always tell because they're sitting up front, unlike the loafers in the back. All right, how many of you think A? A is fake, sorry, A is fake. A is fake. Okay, and about half. How many B think B is fake? A little bit more think B is fake. Slightly more. Wow, look at that. B is fake. You guys performed almost exactly as the literature suggested. You were probably around 54% accurate. Exactly what the literature in deception research from face-to-face work says. The idea here is that the principles still apply. Now, I think this is fascinating because in many ways when people say, oh, I don't trust online reviews, I know that that's just not true because they have these things that they're operating on. But more importantly, look at this latest data from the Global Trust in Advertising survey from Nielsen. What they care about most are peer recommendations in online consumer sites. That's where all the trust is. So you may say, oh, I don't believe online reviews, but in fact, we do. There's only two reasons we would be using online reviews if they were bad. One is that they're like crack cocaine. We can't help but use them even though they're bad for us. Or they're adaptive. They provide useful information, and therefore I go and take a look at reviews. And in fact, that is the case. The last is, how do we in communication deal with these millions of reviews and these millions of constituents that want to participate with us? And I think the difficult thing here is trying to, for example, parse what our different groups are. Like, say that's a group of one type of demographic. These people have another kind of message they care about. This group wants one certain kind of advance on your product, and these people really care about voting. If you try and work with this size of data, we as communication scholars and practitioners cannot. We need to work with data scientists. And I think a really important point here is that data scientists are not the be-all, end-all. I work with a lot of them at Cornell. My lab trains many of them. And they know nothing that we know. They don't know anything about communication practices. But I guarantee you, if you're working in a large institution, there's a data science group in there now, and they're working on the same questions you are, and either you kill them, they kill you, or you start working together to do something better. And those collaborations, of course, are fraught with difficulty. But in my view, and for what I've been seeing in the industry and also in academia, these two groups need each other, and they need to come together, and will be much, much, much more powerful in understanding what comes next. And by understanding what comes next, it's good to look back. This is Diogenes. Anyone remember what he was looking for? A single honest man. Those concerns about deception, they were in Greece thousands of years ago. Confucius, same thing, a concern of authenticity. So these concerns, ideas, principles we have, they're very old. What things that we've learned as communication practitioners, they hold. Now, just trying to understand how they apply in the new world. Thank you very much for your attention. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Jeffrey. And you might wonder what I'm doing, but I'm just going to help Jeffrey off with his jacket here because we need to do a little bit of a microphone change. Thank you. In fact, we didn't need to take the jacket off because it was in your jacket. You were smarter than I was. There we go. If we can just hand this down here, then I can help Jeffrey back on with his jacket.
Oh, thank you. It's getting hot.
There we go.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for that presentation, Jeffrey, and we're going to be having a bit more time for questions afterwards, but I just want to start off with one question before we move on to our second speaker. Simply because many people in the room have also possibly heard there was a lot of noise regarding that very controversial emotional contagion study that was conducted by Facebook in conjunction with a group of researchers from Cornell University. The ethical considerations aside, it also raises huge issues of trust in the digital space. And I'm just wondering what you can say about how heavily people are relying on digital platforms for their information per se.
It's a great question, Karen. And for those of you who don't know, I was involved in a study that looked at how emotion works on Facebook by studying how emotion spreads across the platform. And it was a huge learning experience for us.
In many ways.
In many ways, yes. So one of the main ethical questions of it was, how could you manipulate the news feed? And I received a lot of email from very upset users that asked about how could you manipulate my newsfeed? And what I came to realize, perhaps this is obvious after the fact, is most people don't have a good understanding that everything is manipulated with the newsfeed. Everything's manipulated with your Google search algorithm. Everything on TripAdvisor, iTunes, you go name it. Consumer-facing sites use algorithms to serve you the data. And that was a huge lesson for me, that people really didn't have a good understanding there, and that felt like a violation.
Okay, well, thank you for sort of starting that topic off. We'll get back to it. Obviously, if I could ask you to leave the microphone here, I believe there's an